This is going to be an introduction to fear, the philosophy, psychology, and physiology. You'll learn 3 different philosophical perspectives on fear. You'll learn what we are afraid of, what our fundamental fears are. You'll learn the negative and positive psychological effects of fear. You'll learn the physiology and neurology of fear, what's going on in our body and in our brain. You'll learn about the courage response, which is not spoken about very much, but it's a really impactful way of responding to fear. You'll learn the different faces of fear, the different manifestations of fear, and you'll learn some theories of resolving fear that we're going to be working with. So the philosophy of fear. So these are things that are not necessarily science-based, they're more coming from experience, from reflection. The first one of these is the fear as the price of admission for growth or for authenticity. So Abraham Maslow speaks about the need to become afraid of safety, that it's actually comfort and safety is what's going to pose an existential threat to us. And that fear is simply the feeling of going into what is uncertain or what's unpredictable or what is new. So any kind of learning experience will involve a level of fear. So that's a familiarity that we need to build. That's something that we have to practice, is a kind of skepticism of safety. When am I relying on very familiar patterns of behavior? When am I not really feeling any sense of risk or uncertainty? That's the state that we have to become suspicious of. And the state that we have to become attracted to and curious about is actually a state of, I don't know exactly what's going to happen. I don't have complete control. So the second philosophical perspective on fear that we're going to look at, coming from Martin Heidegger, is fear as a mode of attunement. So when we're afraid of something and we interact with that fear, we learn something. So he describes it as a state of unveiling, so actually learning about the truth of ourselves and the truth of the world that we live in. When we're afraid of something, we get all these strong bodily sensations to run away or to act in aggression. And the ability to calmly and clearly and consciously move towards that source of threat will tell us something about ourselves and about the world that we live in. So fear becomes a way of investigating reality. It becomes a way of breaking illusions. If I'm afraid of something, my body says, don't do this, run away. But I gently, calmly proceed, I move towards it. I'm going to learn something. This is a reality testing. I'm going to learn how precise were my bodily feelings there. Maybe I should have been afraid, but maybe there was nothing to be afraid of at all. So there's a real kind of significant learning that happens when we start moving towards fear, when we start becoming curious and calm and conscious in relation to fear. The third philosophical perspective on fear is that fear doesn't come from the environment, it doesn't come from the emotions, but it comes from thought. So this is from Jiddu Krishnamurti. And he says that fear is essentially an abstraction. It's always in relation to the future or to the past. But fear is never happening in the present moment. The present moment is a sort of passing through in a very neutral way. So Krishnamurti says that we can dissolve our fears through self-observation. So Krishnamurti's view is often very challenging. He's even critical of courage. He rejected practices. He rejected systems and methodologies. So what he said is that fear is that kind of compulsion towards change. It's that kind of tension. It's that kind of self-aggression or aggression towards others or violence towards self or others that says, you need to be different. And so a lot of self-help practices fall into that space where we're violently trying to change ourselves or to change our environment, to change other people. And Krishnamurti says that we can dissolve our fears simply by observing them. So this is something that we can do in the sense of gathering self-knowledge. So when I recognize that if I have a desire to prove myself or a desire to be loved or a desire to be safe, I can start to see how those desires, how those compulsions are actually forming the fear. They're actually forming this comparative mind that fear can be produced by. We can start to shed these dead skins. And he says that a much more energetic and authentic way of being comes out from this process. But it's very challenging to genuinely observe our fears. It's very challenging. So what are we afraid of? The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown. So that's a quote from H.P. Lovecraft, the cosmic horror author. And so this fear of the unknown is being researched and suggested that this is the fundamental fear that we have when we can't predict what's going to happen. That's when we start overthinking, we start doubting ourselves, we start getting tense, we start getting violent, all of these things. So fear will always relate to some fear of the unknown. So the 5 generally accepted core fears, which are all downstream of fear of the unknown. These 5 core fears are extinction, so fear of death or annihilation. Fear of mutilation, so losing bodily integrity, losing an arm or having an injury. Loss of autonomy, fear of being controlled or trapped. It's a really fundamental fear. It's a really deep one that goes into the way that we communicate with other people. Separation, fear of abandonment. So this will speak later about shame, shyness. Ego death. It is a very strong reaction that some people have when their egos are challenged, when their sense of self is challenged. It can feel so threatening that you get these strong physiological changes in your body. If you've ever seen someone fail at something they expected to be able to do, and perhaps that action was core to their identity, that their face drops and they become pale and feel nauseous. So the challenge to the ego can be just as severe as a challenge to the physical body. So these are very core fears. Extinction, mutilation, loss of autonomy, separation, ego death. These are very deep fears that affect the way that we move, affect the way that we perceive the world, and affect our physiology. So let's look at the negative psychology of fear. So fear causes us to exaggerate the negative consequences of a potential action. Fear causes us to understate the benefits of a potential action and to ignore the cost of inaction. So there's a general movement towards not moving forwards. There's a general reluctance to take risk in a state of fear. There's a reluctance to do the things that might benefit us when they have some uncertainty about them. Fear will often produce rigid thinking and a negativity bias. So when we're in a state of fear, as we said before, we tend to see how things could go wrong. When we're very relaxed and happy, we tend to have a more optimistic bias. We tend to see, okay, I think this will be okay, I trust myself. These kinds of things, these kinds of behaviors and phrases start to come up. But when we're in a state of fear, we start to see how things could go wrong. Attention is a very powerful thing. The science of attention is fascinating. When we pay attention to a particular outcome, we increase the weight of that outcome. And that forms a kind of gravity around that action. So when we're pessimistic, we're not being neutral, we're actually being creative. So we're increasing the likelihood of a particular behavior. So it's a really powerful thing, whether we're thinking positively or thinking negatively or optimistically, pessimistically, it's very powerful. Defensive and compulsive behavior. So defensive behavior, if someone says something to me, I interpret it in a particular way, I feel like I'm being attacked, I then respond in aggression. The person didn't mean anything like that, but then I'm angry at them, or I get into a state of fear and violence. That's a bad situation, but it happens all the time. So again, when we talk about the ego fears, the fear of ego death or the threats to the integrity of the ego, defensiveness is a very big one here. So we're often getting defensive when someone criticizes something that we're a bit insecure about. So that's also, it's a kind of fear. Compulsive behavior is a fascinating one. Compulsive behavior. When I'm in a state of fear or a state of uncertainty, I will often start to smile. I'll adopt this kind of compulsive smiling, which is a way of managing uncertainty, or I'll start looking down, or I'll start fiddling with my hands. So these are all manifestations of fear, manifestations of uncertainty. I'm losing my ability to calmly choose what is the best course of action, and I start acting compulsively. Memory distortions and generalized fears. So when we're in a state of fear, particularly as we'll see, one where we are defeated by what we're afraid of or we retreat from it, we are more likely to experience memory distortion. So we will have a negative memory of the event. So when I look back on the thing that I was afraid of, it will feel bigger if I don't confront it. Generalization of fears means that I start to become afraid of the fear source, even when the situation is different. So a dog bites me and then I become afraid of dogs in general, or that particular breed of dogs. So this is also very common. That's going to be correlated with anxiety, as we'll talk about later. Anxiety being a kind of general fear, non-specific fear. Excessive avoidance and social withdrawal. Avoidance is a very fundamental behavior of fear. It's just that withdrawal. It's pulling yourself out of a situation that represents some potential uncertainty or potential threat. But this is a very bad strategy, a lot of the time, to run away, because that feels bad in our body. We get that memory distortion effect. So when we purely run away from something without really testing it out, without trying to resolve it, we'll often remember it as a negative experience. And that can compound and that can create a downward spiral. And that captures a lot of people. A lot of people never make it out of that downward spiral of social withdrawal and avoidance behavior. Shame and helplessness. Fear can be overwhelming. Fear can be overwhelming. And without learning to manage those feelings, you're always going to get to a point where you're uncertain, you're afraid, and then you're not able to act. So there's just a level of uncertainty, there's a level of challenge that you'll never be able to get past. And so that feeling of helplessness, I'm not even going to try and challenge myself because I know that when I get to this point, I'm not going to be able to proceed. The positive psychology of fear. Fear is not bad. Fear is just an energy in the body. It's just an emotion. Emotions are like clay. They're a substance that we can mold if we pay attention to them. If we ignore them, they just sit there as this big ugly lump. But if we pay attention to them, if we play with them, they can become something really beautiful. So fear is the body's self-protection mechanism. So we have to see that. We have to acknowledge that when I'm afraid of something and my behavior goes crazy and I act defensively and I'm aggressive and I'm rude and I'm all of this, I'm actually just trying to be okay. I'm not doing it skillfully, but that's my body trying to gain a sense of well-being, which we all have. We all have that desire to be okay, that desire to be safe and well. So fear is one of those mechanisms. It's just trying to make us feel okay. Fear gives us the ingredients for peak performance. Fear narrows our focus. It dilates our pupil so more light gets in, and our ability to visually focus keenly like a bird of prey flying down towards a specific animal is a very powerful ability in sports performance, in your professional life. The ability to zero in on a task and to really focus on it is a fundamental skill. Goal pursuit. Faster reaction time. Various neurological processes, more blood is sent into the muscles and away from the visceral organs, which are not necessary for sustaining life in this kind of critical moment. So we have faster reaction time when we're afraid. We have a modest power increase. We're probably not going to be able to lift up a car unless you're already almost able to lift up a car. It's going to be more in the range of 5 to 15% of a strength increase in the highest moment. So if you're lifting 100 kilos, maybe you can lift 105, maybe you can lift 115, but you're not going to be able to lift 300 kilos. That's not a thing that has much evidence for. But you will, in a more extreme situation, disinhibit yourself. So you will have a higher pain tolerance, your self-protective reflexes will open up, and so you'll probably be able to produce more force. So this can be an incredible skill to master. So practicing moving in a state of mobilization can powerfully enhance the way that you're moving. It can open up a sort of new level of ability. Social connection. Fear is an amazing social connector. So when you go through an experience of fear with another person, it's very bonding. When you see someone afraid and you support them and you help them overcome that fear, or even better, you are both afraid in the same situation, it's very bonding. You will feel like best friends. Going through these kinds of experiences, going through uncertainty together. These are the sort of natural environments that we were evolved to cooperate within. We're cooperating not just because we're working on a team, but we're working on a team because there's a real source of uncertainty to manage. So it can form very strong social bonds. Fear. Fear is a catalyst for growth, as we've been talking about. It can be a way of breaking through illusions, illusory beliefs. I'm not able to do this, I can't do this, I'm not this kind of person. Those are all barriers of fear, and overcoming those barriers, it's going to be scary, but it's going to show you what's true. Fear can be a source of motivation and meaning. So, if I'm being chased by a bear, I'm going to have a very strong sense of meaning. I need to really strongly get away from that bear. That's going to be a really strong impulse in my body. It's a really strong source of motivation. If I project my mind into the future and I think about, if I don't change this habit, if I don't change the fact that I always watch TV in the evenings, I never do my strength training, I never do my personal practice, or I'm always defensive when my wife says something that I don't like. Those are things that we can imagine going poorly for us in the future. We can imagine those things not working out for us. Really paying attention to the discomfort, the heat that's produced by honestly asking ourselves, what could go wrong if I keep behaving as I'm behaving? That unpleasant feeling, that fear, can be used as a source of motivation. So to do that in a loving way, it's not self-chastising, I'm not saying that I'm a bad person, but I'm just honestly recognizing that there is something that I'm afraid of. That can be a very powerful source of motivation. The neurology of fear. So we're going to get a little bit detailed here. So the amygdala is this tiny little almond-shaped brain tissue right in the middle of our head. It's the center not just of fear, but detecting emotional relevance. So that could be, you see your favorite ice cream in a shop, your amygdala lights up. So it's just anything that's really relevant to us. But of course, uncertainty is very relevant to us. When there's something that we don't know, that we can't predict, that's a very strong source of, you should pay attention to that. So fear is largely coordinated or mediated by the amygdala, and that response, that fear response, can happen as quickly as 0.03 seconds. So that can be a response to a social cue. Someone makes a little twinge in their face and I detect that. My brain responds to that so quickly that I can't even necessarily consciously perceive the fear. And this is where it's a bit of a skill issue, because maybe we can actually train ourselves to notice phenomena that are happening in very short timescales. So traditionally, conscious voluntary thought is happening more on the scale of 0.3, 0.5 seconds. But there is evidence to suggest we can really narrow that down and we can start to notice sensations, phenomena, fears that are happening on smaller and smaller and smaller timescales. The thalamus is a kind of gateway between our sensory experiences and our amygdala. So our initial fear response is a very fast response to the environment. So I see a stick in the grass and I jump. That's visual input, thalamus, amygdala, boom, all happening unbelievably quickly. There is a secondary pathway through the thalamus to the amygdala, which is slower, and it passes through higher centers in the brain and gives us a more precise analysis. So it's slower but more precise. We see that it's actually just a stick, and there's no need to be afraid. But that takes a little bit of time. So it's obviously very useful to have that quick response. It's not very precise, but it's going to get us away from the danger. Then we can assess what the actual danger is. The periaqueductal gray is another kind of gateway, but it's a gateway to the defensive behaviors. So fight, flight, freeze. So the periaqueductal gray is cool because it integrates a broad range of sensory information. So visual, auditory, vestibular, so proprioceptive information from where we feel that we are in space, all gets bundled in together and helps our brain and body decide, am I safe right now? This suggests that the more we can find a sense of familiarity and safety within sensory information, for example, developing a better sense of proprioception. Okay, I can't see right now, but I can feel my spine, I can feel my neck, I can feel the weight of my internal organs, so I know where I am. I don't need to be afraid. But if you don't have that kind of sensory support, then perhaps any loss of balance or any moment of walking in the dark could be very threatening. So developing a sort of more robust range of sensory confidence is perhaps something we can develop in relation to the periaqueductal gray. The prefrontal cortex. So this is the part of the brain that we are consciously using. So this allows us to assess threats accurately. When I have an idea that, okay, I know that I can do this jump, I've tested it out on the floor, I've done similar jumps, I know I'm a bit afraid, that is your prefrontal cortex exerting a kind of regulatory effect on the rest of your body. So I am afraid, but I'm going to calm myself down, I'm going to focus, and I'm going to jump. So it's a really important skill. There can be a kind of tension between these top-down processes, where I'm using my conscious voluntary thinking to make decisions, and these more bottom-up processes, where I'm relying more so on my inner feeling, my kind of intuition, to discern whether a jump is safe, or it's too scary, or it's too dangerous. So sometimes we use too much of the prefrontal cortex and we don't get quite enough action from the insula, from other brain areas related to the intuitive processing. This also relates to the anterior cingulate cortex. So this is part of the brain that monitors uncertainty and supports these what-if thoughts. So uncertainty has a way of growing. So when I only focus on what I'm uncertain about, that can go on and on, because there's always something to be uncertain about. There's always another what-if question to ask. So when the anterior cingulate cortex is overactive, I can end up stuck in these loops of what if this happens, what if this happens, which is a kind of classic fear response. That overthinking is something that can be very negatively impactful. The reflexes of fear. So reflexes are involuntary patterns of movement or emotional response that are pre-programmed, that we all share, but to an individual degree, we have those reflexes integrated, or we're able to coordinate our behavior through those reflexes. It's a strange idea, but they're the scaffolding or the foundation of the building of our self, of our organism. So the fear paralysis reflex is a really crucial one here. It's a withdrawal response that we develop at around 9 weeks in utero, in gestation, and it helps us just to move away from potential threats. But it's this sort of closing in movement. So the chest gets tight, the neck flexes down. So it looks a lot like the shame response. So when you see someone acting in a way that they are not really comfortable with, you'll often see them look down. So that fear seems to have this kind of looking down quality. So fear paralysis, obviously the paralysis aspect, results to inaction. But it can be a very unpleasant feeling of having a kind of high energy body charge. I'm afraid, there's all this cortisol in my body, but I'm also paralyzed. It's a very unpleasant feeling. It's a very discordant feeling. I have this impulse to move, but I can't move. It's a very unpleasant feeling. So the fear paralysis reflex is something that we can learn to recognize in our body. We can learn to integrate and coordinate that reflex. And that can actually help us to relax that pathway, instead of involuntarily being carried away on this kind of shame, tension behavior. We can notice, oh, I'm in this kind of fear paralysis state. Okay, and then with practice, I can actually relax that pathway, and that can really open up a lot of social connection. That can open up a lot of stress, uncertainty tolerance. The Moro reflex is another startle response. It's more so associated with anxiety, but this will tend towards a startle like this, and that can be very harmful in moments of uncertainty. The startle reflex, the mature startle reflex, involves just simply turning towards the source of a kind of sensory surprise. And then we have righting reflexes, protective reflexes, equilibrium reflexes. I feel like I'm moving a bit quickly, but these are things that support our orientation in space and our ability to very quickly handle surprises. So it's really important to recognize that when we could call these postural reflexes, our ability to reorient towards the horizon, our ability to catch ourselves when we fall, our ability to regain balance when our center of mass starts to move outside of our base of support, away from our feet. Without these postural reflexes, we're very vulnerable to these moro reflexes, these fear paralysis reflexes. We don't have this kind of first line of defense against physical uncertainty. So these are really important things to develop, particularly if you struggle with fear. These reflexes are going to support your ability to stay present, to stay calm, to stay confident. There's no way around that. So the physiology of fear. We have the adrenal glands that flood the body with cortisol and adrenaline. This is mediated by the brain also, so that flooding of the body with stress hormones can sustain itself. So it's not always over in a flash, but it can actually go on for a long time. That can cause all sorts of sicknesses. The sympathetic nervous system is the body's gas pedal. So it's what's going to keep us focused, it's what's going to keep us energized, but it can also lead to these kind of fight-flight behaviors. So it's the gas pedal, but we don't want to always be hitting the gas. We need to rest, we need to calm, rest, and digest. The parasympathetic nervous system, the body's brake pedal. So it can calm strong emotions. It can also, in excess, lead to these kind of hypo-arousal depressive behaviors. But the parasympathetic nervous system is also associated with things like sexual function. This is why you get fear erections, things like this. When you're very afraid, your body does these parasympathetic responses, or defecation out of fear. We also have the vagus nerve. So it's a nerve that runs from our brainstem all the way down into our organs and then all the way back up to our brainstem. This has this unconscious to conscious communication system. So it helps us to calm our inner body, and it also helps that inner body to alert our kind of higher functions. So it's the kind of it's one of the meeting points between our involuntary emotions and our voluntary conscious behavior. We have something called vagal tone. So how smoothly and efficiently can information be passed up and down between conscious and unconscious centers? One can imagine that's associated with things like emotional regulation, associated with things like intuitive sensitivity. Can I actually feel what I'm feeling? How efficiently can that information pass up and down? So these are really fundamental things. Breathing and vision are the primary control centers between our conscious and automatic functions. So when I'm afraid, one of the key things that's going to happen is that my breath will become disordered. My chest will start to get tight. I will lose the kind of natural calm rhythm. So we can use these in both directions. Also the vision, I'll start to look around a lot. I'll start to lose focus, or I'll become very intense. So these are things that are affected by fear, but they can also affect fear. So we can consciously calm our breathing. We can consciously direct our vision. And these are amazing ways to use our conscious systems to regulate and calm our automatic systems. So here we're going to look at the fourth fear response. So people will often speak about the fear responses as fight, flight, and freeze. So I'm going to fight the threat, I'm going to flee from the threat, and I'm going to freeze. I'm going to have this death response, death-like response. People sometimes describe fawning as a way of kind of apologizing or making oneself small, but I think that's a little bit different personally. One of the fascinating findings recently on the study of fear has been that when we move towards a source of threat, when we move towards something that we're afraid of, we do it consciously, out of a conscious choice. Pathways in the brain related to reward are activated. Pathways in the brain related to emotional regulation are activated. So when we consciously, courageously move towards a source of threat, our body will find it, even though we're in a state of high arousal, we're feeling the heart is beating, we're feeling that kind of tension, that kind of focus, our body will find a sense of clarity. So it's not necessarily calm in the sense of that kind of like very meditative, slow. It's more like this kind of clarity feeling. What's also really cool about this is that it can have a positive feeling to it when you successfully resolve the source of threat. So when you go into a dangerous or risky feeling situation and you successfully resolve whatever has been a source of threat, a source of uncertainty, you will have a positive memory of that experience. You'll feel good after it's resolved. So that can, of course, support your growth. Okay, I did this and it was scary, but it felt good after. That's amazing. Now I'm motivated to continue. If it felt bad after, and sometimes it does, and there's some nuance there, but if I did something and it felt bad after, I'm going to be generally more discouraged from doing similar things in the future. So this is an amazing brain circuit that we have, where we consciously choose to courageously move towards something that's scary, and we are rewarded with positive memory. We're rewarded with encouragement to continue exploring, to continue developing. The faces of fear. So fear is not just terror. It's not just a feeling that you are watching a horror film and anything could happen. It's often very fast, it's often very subtle, and it can manifest in a range of different ways. So let's look at some of these. So fear often coexists with anxiety. We'll speak more about this in detail soon. Fear is aggressivity in reverse, or aggression in reverse. This is a Carl Jung quote. He says that fear is a sort of inward turning of this particular emotional energy. And when we turn that same emotional energy outward, that's actually assertiveness. Shyness and shame are social manifestations of fear. So shyness, when we're looking away, shame, when we're looking away, we're hiding away from social judgment, from social interaction. These are fear behaviors. And they're probably using the same circuitry of that fear paralysis response. But these are very much things we can think of as fears. Narcissistic states are associated with avoidance of shame. So this is a quote from Alan Shore. So he says that when we are avoiding something, when we have this sense of shame, we have to inflate other parts of our sense of self to find a kind of balance here. Okay, I have this great sense of inadequacy over here, I don't want anyone to see. So I'm going to massively inflate this kind of Donald Trump, everything's gold, everything's as shiny as possible. But then obviously there's this kind of center of shame over here that doesn't want to be looked at. So it's a really great insight that when you see this kind of grandiosity of someone who's just inflating, they're all about me, they're all about bigger, better, that's a bit of a red flag that there's something that they don't want you to see over here. Compulsive behaviors, as I mentioned earlier, compulsive behaviors, the very fast, very involuntary actions of avoidance, of actions of defensiveness. It can even be things like this, like fidgeting. These are also compulsive behaviors that give us a sense of safety, but it's a passive sense of safety. I'm not going out into the environment, I'm not moving forwards and moving down and in. So it is a fear response. So there are practices of noticing when you're doing even small compulsive behaviors. In parkour, it's common for people to wipe their shoes 10 times in a row because they're trying to get a sense of safety, but obviously this is an unconscious, compulsive behavior that's been learned. So we're going to look at aggression and fear is a fascinating connection. So the etymology of aggression is moving forwards. So when you move towards something, that's the energy of aggression. Aggression is not about violence. Aggression is neither good nor bad. It's just an emotional energy. It's something that naturally happens in the body. It's a primary emotion. Assertiveness, determination, self-discipline, and courage are secondary versions of this primary emotion. So any kind of assertive action where I say, I'm going to do, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to focus on this task. I'm going to do this even if it's challenging, even if people around me are telling me it's not a good idea. That's a kind of aggression. It's using the foundations of aggression in a personalized way. So aggression is this kind of primary emotion that's shared by all humans, but the way that we use that emotion is speaking to you as an individual human being. So denial of aggression, we all have aggression. Some people call it assertiveness, but it's that foundational energy of aggression. We all have that. When we deny that in ourselves, when we don't practice that assertive moving forward, we can become passive, but passive aggressive. So we still have a sense that my boundaries are being violated, things are happening that I don't like. But instead of stepping forwards and taking action and doing something about them, we become sarcastic, we become ironic, we start to act out in ways that are involuntary even to ourselves. We can become self-destructive. There are addiction vulnerabilities potentially. We can harm ourselves when we're so afraid perhaps of harming other people that we don't recognize our aggression. Aggression is a strongly socialized emotion. Rightly, it can be very destructive. But we're often told as children, as both boys and girls, not to express aggression, not to express physical force to each other. But we have to integrate this ability to move forward and to assert ourselves. There is research that supports this more psychological claim that denial of aggression blocks other primary emotions, like libido, sexual energy, grief, actually feeling grief, feeling sadness, and also joy. So when we are not allowing ourselves to experience aggression, we're not allowing ourselves to experience that kind of mobilizing life force, there's a lot of other things that we might miss out on. So aggression can be a direct kind of response to fear. And this has personally been something that's been very helpful in the last couple of months. I notice that when I'm afraid of something, now my response is to try to move towards it. And that is a kind of aggression. It feels like a kind of locking in, like a kind of predator. Whereas I can be also very avoidant. So it can be very challenging. Those feelings of internal fear can result in compulsive behavior for me. So that ability to say, I'm going to lock into this has been very powerful for me personally. Fear and anxiety. Anxiety is a non-specific response to threat. It's a generalized response to threat. I don't have a specific, there's a bear over here that I'm afraid of. It's more of, I have a kind of general sense that something isn't right. And that can be from a million different things. That could be something internal, that could be dehydration, that could be indigestion. There can be many sources of anxiety. That's why anxiety is very nebulous, because it's so non-specific. Fear is specific. I'm afraid of something because I know what it is, or I know where it is. I have some specificity towards it. So we don't generally get this mobilization response unless there's something specific to mobilize towards or against. Anxiety is associated with the behavioral inhibition system, which makes our goal-directed behavior shut down. So we find it very difficult to pursue goals when we're anxious. Obviously, that has an adaptive quality to it. If you are anxious about something, maybe you do need to slow down and say, what is going on here? But when that system gets switched on all the time, we're always anxious, we're always uncertain, we're always thinking, what if? That can result in generalized anxiety, or long-term, hard-to-treat anxiety. And that can obviously be catastrophic. Yeah. Shame and shyness are social threat perceptions, they're social fears. Social pains activate a similar pathway to physical pain. So when we feel that kind of cringe or that kind of social pain, it is legitimately painful. It's not just in your head, it's a very real thing. It's really unpleasant. Social fears, to at least a large extent, are set during early life dependence periods when our whole well-being, our ability to survive, depends on another person. If you were someone raised in a family where you were not encouraged to assert yourself, or you were not encouraged to voice your opinion or voice your needs, it's something to explore whether you have a sense of shame or a sense of shyness around that kind of self-assertiveness. And that can manifest in things like being unwilling to say, oh, I need to go to the toilet, I need to go pee, when you're with a crowd of people, a group of people. These kind of small avoidances of self-assertion can be very impactful. And these are, maybe you notice one or two, but it's likely that they're happening much more frequently than you would expect. So this feeling that self-assertiveness will be met with abandonment or even physical threat, it's a kind of legitimate fear for very young children. If you are punished for saying what you need to do, that's a belief, that's a very deeply ingrained belief that you're going to probably take with you into other relationships. This can lead to safety behaviors like people-pleasing, being overly agreeable. And insidiously, that can lead to the suppression of authenticity. Because if I always need to compare my desires, my needs, my wishes against the wishes of the crowd or the wishes of the authority figure, I'm never really going to be able to say what I need. I'm never really going to be able to do what is uniquely my own. I'm never going to be able to express my own kind of creative work if I'm always relying on someone else's opinion. Resolving fear. So there are many different approaches for resolving fear. Some of them are more researched and have large-scale meta-analyses, like hundreds of or tens of different papers supporting their efficacy. So what can we do to resolve fear? What are the different schools of thought, theories, practices on resolving fear? So exposure therapy is the most evidence-based. It's got the most outcome-based data to support its efficacy. Exposure therapy could be you're afraid of a needle, you can't even look at one, but maybe you can tolerate a needle in a box 5 meters away from you. Then a little bit later on, you can tolerate the box 2 meters away from you. Then maybe you could touch the box, and then maybe you can see a photo of the needle, and then eventually maybe you can hold the needle. So it would be this kind of progressive exposure to a source of threat. That's going to help inhibit our amygdala. We get less of this kind of emotional relevance. It just stops being so emotionally relevant. We're changing the association. So it's a really important idea that we learn associatively. So we're a bit like dogs in that sense. Like our emotional world is a bit like the emotional world of a dog in the sense that we just learn through direct experience. We learn through direct experience. If you want a dog to sit, you help them sit down, and then you give them a reward, and then they build this positive association between sitting and the reward. And we're a lot like that. It's just that direct connection between an action and a sensation forms an association. So exposure therapy can also be in the context of movement. So can I feel safe and confident moving with higher levels of force? Can I feel safe and confident moving with higher levels of uncertainty? Can I learn to tolerate those emotions? Acceptance and commitment therapy. So this is a kind of evolution of cognitive behavioral therapy where the relationships to emotions are explored. So it's not about the kind of traditional view of mindfulness, which is maybe about dissolving fears, dissolving anxieties, but it's more about going, I am afraid, I am anxious, how can I do it anyway? How can I accept how I'm feeling, but still commit to this path of action by moving forwards, by deploying various cognitive techniques. This is also very evidence-based. This is a very powerful way to keep moving forwards. As I said before, fear tends to make us exaggerate the negative potential consequences of an action, and simply accepting that those things might happen is a way of clearing our mind. So what we need to do if we're doing any kind of risk-based movement is there has to be a level of clarity, there has to be a level of clearing our mind, so that we can focus on the outcome that we want. And actually accepting the negative consequences is a really powerful way of clearing our mind. So acceptance and commitment is a powerful tool in and of itself, but within that modality there are many skills that we can use. Polyvagal theory has a lot of really nice ideas about the use of self-regulation strategies, co-regulation strategies, ways of using the senses, the sense of touch, the sense of sight, the sense of hearing, and the internal body senses to calm ourselves. This gives us the idea of being regulated in a state of arousal. So we're not just calm in the sense of a monk sitting on a mountain, but we're calm in the sense that we're in an argument, we're in a conflict, big words are being said, big feelings are coming up, but we're still able to be calm and conscious. We're not just being overwhelmed by these fight or flight responses or these depressive hyperarousal responses. So we're still able to be calm and present. There is quite a lot of criticism of polyvagal theory from a theoretical perspective. Apparently a lot of it doesn't hold up, but I still maintain that there are some really nice tools despite the lack of evidence for the theory itself. There are a lot of really nice tools, a lot of nice perspectives related to the ability to feel safe and developing that ability to feel safe, which is a really key, crucial factor for working with fear. We need a perceived sense of safety. So it's not about the actual safety, but there is a sense of letting go or a sense of being safe that seems to be very fundamental. Quick aside note, Jiddu Krishnamurti would also criticize that need for safety as being another kind of illusion. So even letting go of the pursuit of safety, ironically, can offer us a different kind of level of safety, a different kind of confidence. Optimal arousal theory. So practicing movement in a state of higher arousal, learning individually to you what is the best level of excitement that you operate in. So people will often avoid doing jumps, doing movements where their heart rate increases, where they feel that slight sense of adrenaline in the body. But as we mentioned before, through these mobilization responses and this courage circuitry, when we're afraid, we do get this performance boost. So we do get this kind of extra ability to produce force and to focus. We get more precision, more power. So when we find the perfect level of arousal, we can do more than we would otherwise be able to do. But it's often very intense to be in that state. It really takes conscious practice. And so for some people, you can start by just asking, what's the smallest amount of arousal that I can experience and still do a jump? So can I find a jump where my heart rate increases just barely perceptibly, just a little bit? That would be the first step on the ladder. There's a little bit of uncertainty. There's a little bit of mobilization. Can I still move forwards in that state? That would be the first step, and then we can increase arousal while staying regulated. As Alan Shore said, to regulate an emotion in a new way, we have to be in that emotion. So when we're looking at regulating emotions of fear, of uncertainty, we have to do that through direct experience. We can't do it just by talking, by theorizing. We have to be in that emotion. Attentional control theory is unbelievably powerful. It's also very evidence supported. So when we focus outwardly on a task, on a goal, I want to move over here, we use a different kind of control, this automatic reflexive control, more from the back of the brain, from the cerebellum, than when we use this kind of internal self-conscious control. So when we're always reflecting on ourselves, it's often very uncomfortable. So when we're self-conscious at a party, we're self-conscious because there's people watching us or because we're unsure of what we're doing, it feels bad. It feels bad in our body, and it makes our performance much, much worse. So ironically, when we try to control ourselves, we often get worse control. When we let go of control, a more efficient, effective control system can switch online. But that happens by focusing outwardly, clearing our mind. In attentional control theory, we can use things like quiet eye, which means directing our visual focus towards a particular area. That helps to clear our mind. That helps us use this external focus. It uses this more automatic control system. Ironically, when we are in a state of anxiety, we tend to control things internally. We tend to use explicit rules-based styles of control to manipulate our movement. Oh, I need to do this. We tend to fall back on the advice that we were given as students. Oh, my teacher told me to do this, so I'm going to really focus on this. But that kind of self-conscious control actually instigates a downward spiral. So because we start focusing inwardly, we lose this automatic reflexive control. And so ironically, when we try to control our movement, we get less control of our movement. When we let go of control, we actually get a different level of control. Archetypal psychology, so based on the work of Robert Moore, he suggests we can use figures, characters, embody those characters to relate to these aggression energies, these confidence energies, and taking time before a practice to envision such a character, we can actually step into, we can embody the attitude of that character. This is something that's used a lot in drama, theater. It's used quite often in psychotherapy practices, psychodynamic practices, to embody a particular character that represents something that you're struggling with. You can imagine that embodying a character allows you to step into many traits that would be difficult to focus on individually. So if I think, okay, I'm going to embody a king. I'm going to embody this kind of regality. You can see if you can feel that immediately in your posture, if you can feel your posture change, if you can feel the way that you're speaking and breathing change. So this is related to the somatocognitive action network, something that's happening in our brain that organizes our kind of self-image and our attitude. So using images, using characters to coordinate our behavior can very powerfully change the way that we relate to risk, the way that we relate to ourselves, our self-narratives, all of these things. Reflex integration, as I mentioned before, we all have reflexes, but the degree to which they're integrated into our voluntary behavior is very individual. So practicing reflex coordinations, so laying on the floor, moving through patterns of a reflex in a very slow and gentle way, helps us to build voluntary control over these patterns. That can help us control the associated emotional responses. When I have this Moro reflex, for example, there's often a strong stress response. But if I can practice controlling the pattern, I might be able to mitigate that stress response. So to summarize this work, fear is a primary emotion that manifests in a variety of behavioral and felt expressions. Shame, anxiety, aggression. Fear is not inherently negative, but it does always relate to uncertainty. So whenever there's fear, there's some uncertainty. Krishnamurti even defined fear as the movement away from certainty to uncertainty. So consciously moving towards fear activates emotional regulation and reward pathways, affirming Carl Jung's notion that where there is fear, there is a task. So fear is a powerful, fascinating topic that can rule over you without you even noticing, because it happens in such small time frames. Learning the skills to manage the emotional intensity of fear, learning what the downward spirals and traps of fear are, and understanding how to clear your mind and commit to a particular outcome can completely change your relationship to uncertainty, which can absolutely open up new vistas, new frontiers of behavior, exploration, and movement.